Hello everyone, welcome you all back to the Learn Sustainability channel. Today is going to be a very interesting topic, and it's about creating a baseline. So if you're interested in knowing how much of carbon emissions you might be emitting based on what you buy, then probably this is going to be very useful for you to calculate your emissions. So to have some goals or targets, I think it's always best to create a baseline, and so this should enable you to create a baseline, especially if you have a good track and how you're spending your money. And this is specifically to the US, and I will probably do a separate video for the rest of the countries, because there's another tool which enables you to calculate your emissions. Now, the good part about this particular research that has been done on the supply chain emissions is that it calculates the emission from cradle to up to the point of production, which basically means that when I manufacture a product, there are emissions that are happening right from the beginning, and that is from excavation of the metals or so, and then it moves on to production at some factory. And so this emission calculates emissions right from the cradle till the point of production. So it's not just that once I use 1 liter of diesel, the amount of emission is just the 1 liter of emission. There is significant amount of emission that are happening right upstream, because there's a refinery which is producing emissions to create that diesel, and there is oil and gas exploration which happens to ensure that diesel reaches your home. So this is probably a good level of information on how to calculate the emissions. So I would advise you to use this, especially if you're in the US. I'll probably do another one for the rest of the countries. So just type in supply chain emission factor USA, and you should be able to see this one, which is from the US EPA. And if you're interested in some detail on how to use this tool and how this is made, then you can have a look at this. But moving on to the main portion, which is the supply chain emission factors data set, if you just click on it, you should see an XLS file. So this is the supply chain factor for US industries and commodities, so it's specific to the US. So let's click on that, and you should be able to download the Excel file. So once you open this file, you should be able to see a couple of things. One is the contents. It also involves some level of data quality score to at least show other people what kind of quality the data is. Just on the data aspect, if you can see this, 1 is better quality and 5 is poorer quality, so just keep that in mind. So when you see the data reliability score at 4 or 3, which I think predominantly it is at 4 or 3, that means the data is probably not that great, but it's not too bad either. No, not too bad either. So moving on to the other row, which is basically the information which says direct and indirect emission. So direct emission is one which is, suppose you're at home and you burn some fuel, then that's the direct emission. But when you consume electricity, there is emission happening elsewhere in a power plant, so that's an indirect emission. So it is a very good broad scope that it's got to calculate the emissions. So from cradle to point of production per 2018 US dollars. So if you're in 2020 or any other year, there would be some level of inflation that would come into account. But I think considering the data that is available, this data should be pretty good to use. Now on the other aspect, this file also considers the other GHG gases, so it's not just CO2. In fact, they have CO2, methane, as well as N2O, nitrous oxide. They're also accounting the other GHG gases, which is really good because it's more detailed. And they've put one value considering all this emissions as a CO2 equivalent. Now there are files for 2016, 2015 and so on, but if you just come to 2016, you should be able to see all the different commodities, and you can choose a bit depending on what you buy. You can find out which category they fall under, and if they are probably not in the right category, you can find others or so. Another important thing is you will also be able to see the four emissions categories, which is carbon dioxide, methane, nitrous oxide, and other GHG. And the unit is kg per 2018 US dollars. So if you spend $1 of USD in farms, then you should be emitting 0.513 kgs of CO2. CO2. So there are three columns here: supply chain emissions without margins, which basically is, for easy understanding, it's without the factory emissions, and with margins of supply chain emission factors with the factory. So we are supposed to use the column G, which is supply chain emissions factors with margins. So this is up till the factory emissions. Sorry. So now how to calculate based on the dollar I spend. So let's say I buy $1 of a farm material. I will probably take these substances, which is the four emissions, and I will just put that here in paste. So we have the substances, and then we have the emission factors, which are the four emission factors, and so now you can see there's GWP, which is the global warming potential, and you can use these are based on AR5, which is basically the correct global warming potential that you can use. So CO2 is 1, methane is 28, and this one is 265, and this one they have already calculated the CO2 equivalent, so it will be the same number. So if I spend $1 for farm, then my total emissions would be into 1, and this should be for everything plus this one. So the total is so if I buy $1 of farm material, then it is relates to 1.775 kgs of CO2. Now you can find out what that would equate to in terms of cars, or number of cars taken out of the roads, or number of trees equivalent, based on some parameters that may be available on web, but this would be the actual CO2. Now this one doesn't differentiate between it's vegan or the type of food that we have, but it collectively takes the whole value. Another important aspect is the different emissions. To give you a broad idea, you can see that the amount of CO2 is pretty high for oil and gas at 0.5. There are some which is utilities, you can see it's 2.884. It's very significant. It also gives you an idea of where our major emission sources are, and where there are less emissions. So I hope this has been useful, and it would be easy for you to calculate based on what you buy, the amount of emissions that is happening. So you buy less and you should be able to get less emissions. So if you're interested in contributing significantly to the environment, then this tool should help you in calculating the emissions, and also help you in keeping it low. So that's all from my side, friends. I hope you all have a very good day. Thank you. Hello everyone.